And my next guest that's coming up, she actually has a book on the way. It's called Bricks Matter. And this is not a brick up here, but I was fortunate enough to get my hands on this morning. This is actually the manuscript for Lora Cecere's book called Bricks Matter. I hope it's going to be out soon. I got through about 20 pages this morning. It's fantastic. It's relevant, and it's fresh. So without any further ado, please welcome Lora Cecere.
Thanks. So can I touch your Stevie?
You can. God, did I hear that a lot last night.
Oh, such a great Stevie, huh? Well, good morning. I want to tell you a true confession. Today I'm going to tell you that I unknowingly have told 3 lies and a truth in my 9 years of supply chain management and speaking. So my name's Lora Cecere. I started running manufacturing systems, built supply chain planning, and I have been fortunate enough to be an industry analyst for 10 years. Do a lot of writing on a blog called Chain Shaman, and I think supply chain matters. So I decided to write this book. And for 2 years, I shopped the concept around bricks matter, right? It's not about clicks and sexiness, you know, hardcore supply chain stuff matters. And everyone said, what a boring book. No one's going to read it. And that may be true, so I'm hoping that you'll change that prediction. But I think we've made supply chain boring, you know, with our 4-letter acronyms like LL, you know, show. And we haven't really learned to talk the language of business. And so I want to challenge you to change that. I'm trying to do it in my own way with trying to redefine the analyst model and writing a book. And I want to tell you what I learned. So first of all, it took me 13 months to write the book Bricks Matter. I interviewed 75 first-generation pioneers, and 2012 is the 30th anniversary of supply chain management. How cool is that? 30 years, right? And so the book is really the celebration of those 30 years to look at 3 primary concepts, that it's about assets and distribution and doing things right. But it's also what we did in the emerging economies and the building of global supply chain organizations. And unfortunately, we learned the best when we failed. And how do we fail forward, and how do we not have those failures? So I tell the story of the failures and of the successes. And I got lots of gray hair getting the failures approved because everybody wants me to tell the stories of success, but not necessarily the story of failures. But the other thing is, it's about the evolution of supply chain practices. And as I told the story, and as I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought the book would never end, I learned that even though I had written for a long time, and in fact, I've written about supply chain for 9 years, I've told 1 truth that I believe in, and 3 lies. And I think that you also may be telling lies, and so I want to help sensitize you to that. So what are they? Well, if we look at the supply chain trends, growth is flattening for most industries. We're at a patent cliff for pharmaceuticals, where we've got a lot of work in generics. We've got the rise of e-commerce, which is making bricks and mortar be redefined for retail. We've got the whole re-evolution of industries and high-tech and physical goods. So I come to you today with the first lie that I believe that everyone is told, is that we have best practices. I don't believe it. No, I don't. I think we have evolving practices. And I think we've gone asleep at the switch, letting consultants come in and tell us their best practices. I believe from the stories in the book, it's about leadership to question the future. It's about the use of new technologies and questioning why that has driven us forward. And like the guy on this moving sidewalk, which often reminds me of the Chicago and the Detroit experiences of I've got to run to the airplane, right? We've been propelled so fast through business change that we haven't felt the sidewalk under our feet moving ever so slowly of changes in technologies, of processes. And I think that the processes are evolving. And I do not think today we have best practices. I think the people in this room have the opportunity in the next decade to define that. And that's what I want to help you do. The second thing is, we've lied that we've reduced inventory. We haven't. Have you seen that obligatory slide with everyone's presentation that they've reduced costs by XYZ, they've reduced inventory, they've improved customer service? The only industry, and let me just hold this mirror up in front of you, the only industry that has reduced inventory is high-tech and electronics. Give yourself a pat on the back. Yeah, let's see the lights. High-tech and electronics is the only industry that has reduced inventory. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, you can see a lot of those are going in the wrong direction. Well, what happened? I think we made a mistake by assuming we had best practices, and we put in projects that were isolated, we had processes that weren't connected, and we lacked clarity around overarching business strategy. To me, supply chain is the language of business. And it requires continuity and clarity of supply chain strategy. And 95% of the people that I interviewed for the book were not clear on supply chain strategy. So as we've done things in isolation, yeah, we may have made small improvements. But were we able to sustain it? No. Were we able to drive it for the corporation? No. The third lie I think we've told is this whole idea around collaboration. How many times have you been to a presentation and they say they collaborate, right? No, it doesn't happen. What I'm studying is value chains from hospitals through medical devices to suppliers, from retailers to consumer packaged goods to suppliers, from the earth, from metals and mining, through materials to semi-finished goods to high-tech and electronics. We didn't collaborate. We put our hand in one pocket and our hand in the other pocket, and we talked about buy-sell relationships, and we moved cost backwards, inventory backwards, waste backwards in the supply chain to suppliers that are less able to shoulder the burden. And as a result, many supply chains failed, like automotive. And we never solved the problem of the bullwhip effect. We all played the beer game. I'm not talking about the one in college. We played that one too, right? But the beer game, right? We have never solved the problem of the bullwhip effect. We have taken cost out of the supply chain, transaction by transaction, pushed it systemically back in the supply chain, but we haven't really collaborated. And when I talk about collaboration, I'm just not talking about two nice guys getting together at the bar and talking about, what they're going to do in a relationship. I'm talking about a sustainable win-win relationship that's focused on value. In my book, there are two examples of true collaboration. TSMC and the building of their design network for semiconductor, and performance-based logistics in aerospace and defense. Every other value chain has systemically pushed cost and waste backwards in the supply chain. And it's because we don't know what that term R should be, relationships. There was no R in CRM, there is no R in SRM, but relationships matter. And as a result, we don't have the right stuff. This is actually a slide from Procter & Gamble that was presented at the Efficient Consumer Response, and I said, I really want that slide because it deals with, if we have a sustainable win-win value proposition, what's the right stuff we need to bring to the table? And Procter & Gamble said, we created confusion and anxiety and false starts and frustration and maybe gradual change, because we didn't have the right stuff. We didn't have the shared vision, we didn't have the right skills, We didn't have the right incentives. And by the way, the biggest reason why collaboration has failed is incentives. We hadn't had shared planning, and we didn't have leadership. So the 3 lies that I want to tell you about today, because I think they're an opportunity for the truth, is we haven't reduced inventory, we don't have best practices, and we are not good at working with each other. But the truth is, supply chain matters. Bricks matter. What you do matters. And it's now I want to tell you that story. Because as supply chain leaders, what we do matters. So you might say, well, Laura, how do you know that's not a lie? Well, it's because I've gone through Fortune 1000 over the last 2 decades, and I've looked at their balance sheets, and I've tried to find correlations between what I know they've done and the balance sheets, and I can find that. And now I want to tell you that story. So what is supply chain excellence? I ask a lot of companies this because I work with a lot of companies in strategy days. And they say, aren't you the dumbest analyst in the world that you don't know what supply chain excellence is? No, because I think it's changed. As we look at the evolution of supply chain excellence, the average company has 150 systems and they still can't get to data. I'm going to show you that only 27% of companies know total cost, and only 8% of companies believe they have sufficient what-if analysis. This ability to get to data is pervasive, and it is a problem across all systems. And one of the issues was we believed that integrated ERP would solve our problems. It did not. We believed that the first generation of advanced planning would solve our problems. It's about more than theory of constraints for manufacturing. The second thing here is, oh my gosh, it's the understanding of the management and the leadership team about supply chain excellence. Each of you have got to define it, and we've got to tie it to the business, and we've got to make sure that people are aligned. Every study I'm doing, I'm seeing this over and over and over again. So what is supply chain excellence? In the book, when I interviewed the first generation of pioneers, they said at first it was all about cost. It was about the efficient supply chain. It was about working capital. It was about really managing the cash-to-cash cycles. And then they found that the efficient supply chain was not the most effective supply chain, that it required balance with customer service. And that's where we saw the evolution of right product, right place, right time, at right cost. And if you believe that, you need to evolve. Because the world is a network now, and it's about the resilient supply chain that can be designed for the absorption of demand and supply variability. Postponement, changes in form and function of inventory, design of supply chains, supplier development strategies. But that isn't sufficient, because when I was at AMR, I did a lot of writing about demand-driven value networks, which is how we sense and we shape. But it can't just be about the channel. And one of the things I learned in the writing of the book is we have to be channel to channel, buy to sell, bi-directionally. Commodity prices, commodity scarcity, and our management of suppliers is a big gap for 80% of the companies I interviewed for the book. And this ability to have these horizontal processes of revenue management, supplier development, sales and operations planning, corporate social responsibility, and to be able to bring those together for bidirectional movement of demand and supply variability is what defined leaders. But the other thing is, our supply chain is a place where we can test and learn. We can now listen to customers directly. We can now sense suppliers directly. We can test and learn in vitro with strategies, and new forms of predictive analytics allow us to do that. So it's not about old forecasting. It's not about old suppliers. It's about sensing. It's about shaping. It's about active management of the supply chain. And I love the new forms of predictive analytics. But most people haven't found their way to that moving sidewalk, right? 45% still believe it's right product, right place, right time. They're not going to have that resilient supply chain. They're going to fail because their suppliers aren't going to be able to overcome an earthquake in California or a big issue in Thailand. So how do we think about this? And I want you to think hard on this, because a supply chain is a complex system with increasing complexity at a business level. And one of the issues that I see is most people do not understand the supply chain as a complex system. And I think that's the biggest gap in the management team. And one of the things that worries me is this fourth generation of supply chain leaders is coming from business school. They're not coming from engineering schools. And so they don't understand this concept of a complex system. And most of the writing is around increasing business complexity, not about managing what I'm going to call the effective frontier. And when we look at supply chain leaders, they move the ball forward on this effective frontier. We all want profitable growth. And we've got to balance revenue with cost of goods sold, but the story doesn't stop there. It needs to be about working capital and corporate social responsibility. And 80% of companies do not have good alignment between corporate social responsibility and what they're trying to do in their supply chain. We've not been clear enough. And it's about what we do with assets, R&D strategies versus our strategies for bricks and mortar. And then we can talk about forecast accuracy and customer service and inventory. And I firmly believe it's not about the number in demand planning, it's about the probability of demand. And I believe you cannot get to supply chain effectiveness by only working on supply. And then we've got to talk about policies. We've got to talk about channel strategies and supplier strategies and product strategies and portfolio strategies. And that is supply chain. But most people start at the bottom. They talk about waste. They don't embrace the effective frontier. They don't learn the language of business. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm running quantitative surveys. If I ask you to do a quantitative survey, please help me out. I don't charge you money. I publish everything openly. And I'm connecting the maturity models and the quantitative studies to look at financial ratios, because I think we have not elevated the discussion of supply chain high enough. So I have built a database of supply chain ratios that really look at these 4 types of ratios we can get off the balance sheet. And at the end of this talk, if you'd like to have something run on your company, like what I'm going to show you, I'll do that in my community for free, because I want to raise the level of understanding. So the first is profitability, our ratios. The second is growth, our ratios we can get off the balance sheet, and cycles and complexity. And I believe it's the intersection of these, and it's the trade-offs that matter. I fundamentally do not believe that you can put all industries in a spreadsheet on a few metrics and shake them up and declare a supply chain winner. I also don't believe it can happen year over year. I think it is decades of work. In fact, one of the quotes of the first generation supply chain pioneer was, "You cannot make real progress in less than 3 years." And we really have got to judge ourselves by 5 years or 10 years. So with that, let me tell you what I'm doing. I think best-in-class supply chains show better performance than their peer group year over year. There's consistency in results, independent what happened to the market, and the leadership has managed the trade-offs. Let's look at some of this. So if we take the cash-to-cash ratio and we look at gross margin, let's look at some of these supposed leaders. On the left-hand side, we have DuPont. DuPont did this kind of movement, right? They did better than BASF, if you look at their peer group, but they actually slid backwards in gross margin, and they didn't make a lot of improvement on cash-to-cash. Now let's take our next one, Samsung. I really think Samsung is a great leader. In their category, and we're going to show you some information about Samsung, they did really well in building the global supply chain. But look at the variation. They went backwards to go forwards. Now look at Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble does not do as well on gross margin as Colgate. And yes, they went backwards with the Gillette acquisition, but they actually systemically reduced cash-to-cash. And they did it through technology and technology leadership. Look at Colgate. You might say they're not making much progress, but if you look at it against their peer group, they weathered the recession pretty well. But what about those pharmaceutical guys? Let's look here at Merck, which is the next one. Look at that. Woof! That was the recession. Pharmaceutical companies are fundamentally not ready for what's going to happen in their supply chain, with what's going to happen in hospitals and being able to redefine the value chain and medical supplies. Just not ready. Look at the inconsistency of what happened with the recession and the impact on cash to cash. They couldn't weather it. Now look at medical devices. Very characteristic of the medical device industry. Lots of gyration. So I'm studying the patterns. I'm putting these value chains together. And what I see is that companies that do this best have had systemic year-over-year improvement, better than peer group, and they've been able to really work at the intersection of this effective frontier. And I'm running analysis that look like this. So getting back to the financial ratios, be sure we're all defined. And then what I do is I look at peer groups. So here's LG versus Samsung. Look at the patterns, right? Much more variation than what you saw with Procter & Gamble and Colgate. So here we have Samsung very high in cash to cash. They go down. They've actually got great discipline around inventory, weren't able to sustain it, and they came up. Look at LG. Not as effective in gross margin, but they actually made more year-over-year improvements in cash to cash. One of my favorite analysis, and one of the ones I'm going to be looking into more, is look at these two companies. Look at Casio on year-over-year improvement in cash to cash. Anybody from Casio in the room? I'd love to talk more about this. And look at what happened with Nikon, right? Great examples of peer groups. Now look what happened in revenue per employee, right? The biggest impact of ERP was improving revenue per employee. It wasn't in inventory, it wasn't in reduction of gross margin, it's about revenue per employee versus inventory turns. Okay. What is supply chain excellence? I think it is the definition of the supply chain strategy to deliver the business strategy. And I think we've started at the wrong place. We started at the bottom of this chart with, we're going to have best-in-class processes. We're going to start with process and we'll be all okay. No, you're not, because you're not clear on supply chain strategy by and large. You haven't asked the question about, how do I build demand networks? People can write all they want about Apple and Dell, but Apple and Dell get daily data daily from their channel. They built demand networks when they built their supply chain. And we need to be thinking about product platforms and how we decrease business complexity. And also, this issue around designing the supply chain response, we can't inherit it, we've got to design it. And are you ready for what's going to happen with supply chain talent? 1 in 5 planning jobs right now are open for 5 months. We can no longer have retreads where we pass planners from company to company. We are going to face a tremendous shortage. Business process outsourcing is going to become your new best friend. And we are going to have to own the building of talent. And we're going to have to challenge our current processes. And we're going to have to help people to understand that supply chains are complex systems. And we're going to have to help our suppliers, because there's not good talent development in Brazil and China and Russia. In fact, I've got 4,000 people that read my blog, and 50% of them are in these countries, and they ask me questions every day. They don't understand it. We've got to take responsibility for talent development in our supply chain. But you don't start at the bottom with process. And you can't go to sleep saying that we've got great processes now. We've got to be honest with ourselves. So as we look at this race for Supply Chain 2020, this new decade, the welcoming of the 4th generation of supply chain pioneers, I think what we've got to do is look at the world. There's a race for Africa. We've got stabilization of markets in China and India and corporate social responsibility is going to be our defining platforms for the evolution of the next generation of supply chain. And we've got to look back so we can learn from the future. And these were the tipping points that the pioneers told me about how S&OP happened not yesterday, but 31 years ago, and we're still arguing about what it is. Yeah? And then we had the evolution of the PC, and the pioneers said that the biggest impact of technology was on their span of control and the ability to grow revenue per employee. And I think back to that portable PC that required 3 men to carry down the hallway, right? How much has changed, yeah. And then that supply chain organization that we fought so hard for, we've got it now, and we've got a chief supply chain officer, but we've got to lead the future of business. And we talked about re-engineering the corporation. We brought out email and internet. Oh my gosh, I wish we hadn't brought out email, right? And then we brought out e-procurement and total quality management. But we didn't look holistically at the supply chain and what that meant for relationships and what that meant for waste. And then we had the go-go years of Y2K and ERP, and yeah, we put a lot of stuff in really fast that doesn't really help us with supply chain strategy. Lean Six Sigma and .com, demand-driven concepts we evolved 6 years ago, and we still haven't really embraced them. Social responsibility we're still struggling with. Chief Supply Chain Officer, getting a seat at the table. And I believe that it's now time for market-driven value networks, which is an adaptive network focused on value-based outcomes that senses and translates market to market. I believe it requires a new form of analytics, rethinking of supply chain planning, getting our hand on new talent, training them, focused on compliance, safe and secure, which is going to move us into big data supply chains, Internet of Things, machine to machine, pumps that drive maintenance schedules versus schedules done on time, sensing of trucks, sensing of pallets, sensing of cases, sensing of machines with warranty, which will evolve into rules-based ontologies and learning supply chain and digital manufacturing. This is the future. Like the guy on the moving sidewalk. But we can't just paint in the old boxes. We can't just call and talk the same language. I think we've got to paint outside the lines. We've got to have new brushstrokes. And we've got to say that current state of supply chain planning that was vertical doesn't fit anymore. It rewarded vertical silos. Everybody planned within their own boxes. We didn't have the layer that supports the building of these horizontal processes of revenue management, sales and operations planning, supplier development, corporate social responsibility. We didn't have systems that translated and orchestrated demand market to market. That's evolving now. We didn't have the horizontal processes for demand and supply sensing. I'm so glad to see it happening. It's the building of these horizontal processes and horizontal technologies that will leapfrog us into the next generation. And all, by the way, they don't come from those 3- and 4-letter acronyms that you're used to saying. And they don't come from the traditional vendors that knocked on your door yesterday. And as we think about the building of these horizontal processes, I think we've got a question that we had best practices. 24% of companies can get to total supply chain cost. How can you manage a supply chain if you can't get to total supply chain cost in an enterprise? And only 8% of companies today say they have sufficient capabilities for what-if analysis. That tight integration of ERP and APS just didn't cut it. We need a what-if analysis. There's a reason why Doug's successful. And when I ask leaders about what they're excited about demand sensing, but they're really excited about cloud. I read a report today from an analyst firm that said supply chain is not going to be a place for big data. And I'm like, that analyst firm just doesn't understand supply chain. Line of business leaders are leading this evolution of the next generation of supply chain. It is going to be all about cloud, all about business process outsourcing, and it's not going to be about dirty data. It's going to be about embracing different data. When I talk to Amazon and eBay, they don't have master data problems because they weren't stupid enough, excuse my, to think that we can simply code in the old traditional ways master data. Instead, they use search and indexing and rules-based ontology to map data. We need to learn from them. And as we think about sensing and cloud-based technologies, we've got to paint with new brushes. So what is big data? That old supply chain worked on structured data. We caught orders and shipments, and we believed they were demand. And as we look at new forms of data, unstructured data, warranty system, call centers, what's happening in the channel, what's happening with suppliers, sensor data, RFID, machine-to-machine, new data types, video, maps, we're going to see this whole evolution of big data. You need to lead it. It's not about what we did yesterday. It's what we're going to do now. And we've got new terms to learn. R and data visualization and dupe. These are our new friends. So as we think about this visibility, and we think about control towers and visibility, it isn't just about layering new stuff on old stuff. I think it's fundamentally questioning what we're doing and embracing new forms of predictive analytics to be able to sense, act, and respond, and also to learn. Because in the old days, we thought the end-to-end supply chain would look like this. You had an ERP system, I'd connect it to yours, and then we'd connect it to yours, and we'd all be okay, because we could pass shipments and orders just fine. Don't think that's the way the world's going to work in this new big data supply chain. No, I think what's going to happen is we're going to have this green box of new ways of predictive analytics. And we need to invest money to invest in new technologies because it can't all be about a definitive ROI. In fact, the leaders in Bricks Matter didn't ask for a definitive ROI on every project. They invested money as technology as a way to innovate. And these green boxes that look at new forms of predictive analytics for big data and predictive analytics are going to be what leaders use to define the next generation. And it's going to require demand signal repositories and supplier signal repositories and data systems and system of record in between companies. And we're going to have to put real relationships into the supply chain and just not fool ourselves that we've truly collaborated. Now, this world of social, I'm real excited about, right? As we look at the open graph and the interest graph, I'm going to challenge you that you should be thinking about how you use social in your supply chain, not just with social CRM, but fundamentally think about how the open graph and the interest graph can change your supply chain. Let me give you an example. I'm an old gal. I decided a couple of years ago I would lose weight, and I lost 30 pounds, and part of it was I learned how to run. And along that way, I joined with other runners, and I became friends with Facebook, and I told them I ran. And so they sold me shoes that sensed how much I ran. And now, every time I reach a goal, they send me a new pair of shoes. And they continue to send me new pairs of shoes because I give them reviews. And they ask for my input on those shoes. And I am a fan of Nike because of it. You have the ability to have an intimate relationship with your customers also at the intersection of the open and social graph. But you're going to have to push it and help marketing to understand it. So let me give you an idea. You know, now we can have all different kinds of buttons on Facebook or on your website. This is giantnerd.com. It's one of my favorite sites because it's for nerds, and they celebrate being nerds. You know, the best mountain bike, right? The best backpack, the lightest hiking shoes. And they don't just say they like something, they say they love it, they have it, they want it. Well, how can you use this? It could be a causal factor in forecasting. If you're doing attribute-based planning, it can be an attribute. You can learn from it based upon demographics for new product launch. 80% error is the standard on new product launch. We do a horrible job of getting demand insights. And we can listen. So this is an example from Newell Rubbermaid, right? They had this product they thought was really cool for new products that they went out and they got vegetables and they wanted people to have longer lives of their vegetables. And they pushed the product into the channel, and they thought it was great because they saw the inventory go down. But because they were reading Facebook, they saw that they were so disappointed in the product that the product molded, that they were able to say, wow, we did a horrible job on instruction for customers about how to use that product. They weren't supposed to wash the vegetables. Well, I wash all vegetables going in my refrigerator, right? We have to educate the consumer how to use this product. And because they were reading Facebook, they were able to totally reverse this new product launch. Companies that do supply chain well have weekly meetings where quality, marketing, customer service, read social, whether it's Twitter tags or Facebook, and they look at the quality of products, right? And they don't just ask the questions that they know to ask, they listen for what they don't know to ask. Toyota should have listened if their brakes were working. It's not something they would have put a report out on, right? Kellogg would have known 5 weeks earlier that they had smelly liners in their cereal, and they would have avoided a $260 million write-off. So our ability to listen, to have an experience with customers, to think outside in, to be able to use new forms of data is a wonderful opportunity. So I'm going to start to wrap up so that I can get interrogated here. You know, I'm an old gal. I've been at this for 30 years. Some of you have been too. And I think historically we've tried to get precise on inaccurate data, like the 9th significant digit of forecasting. Forget about it, right? It's the probability of demand you need to dance with. It's about the probability of demand that you need to get right. We've confused sales-driven or marketing-driven with market-driven, right? We believed that if we wanted to know how much we were going to sell, we'd ask sales. The biggest bias and error in consensus forecasting comes from sales. Second biggest bias and error comes from marketing, and the third comes from manufacturing. We've got to hold people accountable for bias and error, and we've got to build effective horizontal processes outside in, from the value chain in. We can no longer just wait to catch orders and shipments. And we've been lulled to sleep that we've got best practices, that it was the most efficient supply chain that was the most effective. It isn't. Be sure you define supply chain excellence and measure yourself year over year over year against peer group, against the effective frontier, and I'd be glad to run your ratios for you. And outside in is a fundamentally different way of doing business. Map your processes from your customer back. Learn how you listen. Think about new ways of predictive analytics. But overall, be sure you reward the important. So many times I see we put technologies in, and we don't give people time to plan. And we react. There was one company I worked with that spent $58 million on a new system. They actually improved their forecast error by about 30%, but they didn't improve any of their other supply chain metrics. And I said to them, why? And they said, well, perhaps it's because we reward the plant that changes over the quickest, or the supplier that can expedite shipments. A supply chain that runs well year over year over year is the unsung hero. And what I see in the results is bricks matter. Supply chain matters. When a company is able to drive at the effective frontier year over results, they rise above peer group in growth, profitability, and market share. It matters. Let's stop lying to ourselves. We didn't reduce inventory. We don't have best practices. We designed systems. We've got to unlearn what we learned to relearn, to embrace new forms of predictive analytics. It's exciting. It matters more than ever. And to help you on that journey, I've built a community. It's free for everyone to join. And in this community, I'll run supply chain ratios for you for free. And I will allow you to connect with other people. All the research is free. I may ask you to fill out a survey from time to time. And I want my community to be like like Yelp is for restaurants. I want technology ratings and reviews and consulting ratings and reviews. I want to return the power to you, the buyer. So one of the things Kinexions is doing at this event is if you put in a review for Kinexions product, you earn 2 points against the iPad 3. I want to see you in my community. I want you to be active. I want you to tell other people about technology and consultants, because I don't believe that recommendations should be made by an analyst in a dark room on a dartboard on a 4-quadrant model. I think it should be done by you. I want to change this model. And the other thing is I want to help with education. So I've got a Wikipedia. If you think I don't have the terms right, let me hear your voice. And there's a place where you can ask a supply chain wizard. Roddy and Trevor are wizards in the community, and you can get your ratios and you can see podcasts and webinars. I want to change the model. I want everybody to know we're on that moving sidewalk, and I want to embrace the supply chain superhero. So in the community, you get points for sharing, and in January you'll get points for knowledge, because I want to change the market. I want to make a difference. I believe bricks matter. So with that, do we have any questions? What happened to Bill? Bill, I'm going to play with your Stevie.
Right here. There you go.
What you think,
Okay.
huh?
Yeah. Good stuff.
Did you read this whole book?
Good. I did, almost.
Okay.
Not sure